So yes, welcome. This is our final installment of our CoPro 2022 series on evaluation and equity-based co-design. And I think that we're going to start with a land acknowledgement that I will turn over to Ray.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to start the day by beginning by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the land where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land.
And I would just add that, in August, our CoPro, a bunch of us from CoPro had this opportunity to gather at Six Nations and learn from the Indigenous hosts there. And it was very wonderful and humbling, and learning about connection to the land was really very enriching, I think, for all of us. And I probably should introduce myself. I'm Sandra Mall. I am one of the co-directors of the McMaster Co-Design Hub, and I'm based at McMaster University. And Ray, sorry, I should invite you to introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm coming from Treaty 7 territory in Calgary, Alberta. I work as a knowledge broker in family engagement in research training, but also I come as a parent of a disabled young man and a frequent patient partner as well.
And today is really a rich mix of speakers, but also to acknowledge that we have, I want to call it a growing CoPro family. And just to recap sort of what we've been doing since, I guess, May of last year. And I apologize, I should acknowledge we have a SSHRC funding to put on this CoPro series, so we're grateful for that. And we've had a number of, I'm not sure the people on the line today, whether you attended any of these, but we've had some online panel discussions with speakers from around the world. We've done some in-person workshops as well, and we had an in-person symposium in August as well. So, today is kind of the final installment of CoPro 22, but you'll hear that there's more to come from today. So just a little bit of a recap from where we've come from, and we'll talk today about kind of where we're going to go from here. So the plan for today, I think that the agenda was 9 to 11:30. We'll see whether we need all that time, but we're going to start by talking about different approaches to evaluation in co-design. And we'll talk about realist evaluation, developmental evaluation, and then have some discussion. We'd love to hear from you around your thoughts around and experiences around evaluation in this space around equity-based co-production. And then we'll maybe have a bit of a break, and then we want to have some time to talk about where do we go from here. So we'll talk about, some things that we've heard from people, attendees at our different events. We'll talk a little bit about a charter for going forward, some of the key things we've learned in terms of prototypes and key issues. How do we do this equity-based work? What are some of the opportunities and challenges? We'd love to hear from you as to how you'd like to be involved, and then some new opportunities down the road. So that's our plan for today. And again, we welcome people to share comments and thoughts as we go along. And I can't see the chat. If there's anything I need to know, please, I'm so sure someone will prompt me. So that's a bit of our intro, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just launch right in. I will turn the floor over to Sam, Louise, and Michelle to talk about realist evaluation.
Thanks, Sandra, and thanks, everyone. So nice to see a lot of really familiar faces and people that are popping up from different pockets of work that I've done. So it's really nice to see lots of people here today. I have the pleasure of working with the Co-Design Hub, and we are going to be talking about one of the projects that we've been working on for the past, I'd say 2 years or so, and it's still ongoing, but we're going to be talking about our realist evaluation of co-design with vulnerable populations. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We will start with just an introduction of who we are and how sort of we're coming to this work. So If you don't know me, I am Sam Machinsky. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a registered nurse by clinical training, and I have the pleasure of being a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Rehabilitation Science at McMaster University in Canchild. I come to this work with an interest in patient and family engagement in research and co-design, particularly for those who may face additional barriers to engagement. And I have had the privilege of working on this project and learning from my colleagues, Louise Murray-Long and Michelle Phoenix. And I will hand it off to Louise to introduce herself. Next slide, thanks.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be here as well and see some familiar faces and new faces as well. I'm an experience expert, as we call it, with the hub. I also sit on our provincial advisory council with the Knowledge Institute on Child and Youth Mental Health and Addictions, and also provide family peer support for families caring for children and youth with mental health concerns. And so that's kind of the perspective I bring, that lived experience perspective. And so I also am an engagement professional, and so youth and family engagement is my background and training as well. And because of that, I got involved with the hub and co-design work, and it's just been a marvelous experience. And equity-based co-design that we're really working towards now is definitely something that I really believe in. And partly because of that is because of the influence and the power that comes from lived experience perspectives. And so I'm really interested in building networks and connecting people with lived experience with one another to share their knowledge and help build system capacity from that. And I do believe that that is a mechanism for achieving and working towards social justice in our society. So I'm going to pass that along now to Michelle.
Thanks, Louise. Gosh, how lucky am I to work with you and Sam? My name is Michelle Phoenix. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Rehabilitation Science and a Canchild scientist. I'm also co-lead with Sandra of the McMaster Co-Design Hub. My work has been primarily with young children with disabilities and their families, often looking at access and equity in service delivery and how we can better partner with sometimes referred to as marginalized or structurally vulnerable populations to enhance both service delivery and evaluation. Next. Oh, our agenda has disappeared. Let me just walk you through a brief agenda that's on my screen, but not on yours. So we'll begin with talking about what is realist evaluation and why is it used. We'll then walk you through our case study. It's work that we've done at the Co-Design Hub to conduct a realist evaluation to better understand how health and social services are co-designed with structurally vulnerable populations. And then we'll wrap up with some reflections on our experience with realist evaluation. So beginning with the first of those topics, what is realist evaluation and why is it used? Next slide. I'll turn it to you, Louise.
All right. So co-design it's a human-centered design process, and by that nature, it's a creative process. And thinking about why evaluation in co-design is important, it got me thinking about my experience learning to sew as a child. That was just something I loved to do, and how it wouldn't matter what kind of thing I was making. What I was going to make was always going to be different than what someone else would make. But you know, this type of stitches I would use would depend maybe on the type of fabric or what I was putting together. You know, the garment, whatever that happened to be, you know, everyone would come up with something different, but the underlying techniques would be similar, and learning and building knowledge and sharing that was certainly something that helped improve my skill sewing, which I should also confess, I probably haven't sewed anything for like 20 years. But that was definitely what, you know, I was thinking about, and why we do evaluation with co-design, because yes, it is different every time, but there's much to be learned from that. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach for co-design, and every instance requires that careful planning and having that creativity and being flexible, and that's designed to be specific to the context, the setting, the issue, and the people that are involved. But we don't want to assume that co-design is a process that's so unique that there is nothing of value for others, and that we don't all start co-design processes or projects from scratch. We do go and look and see what other people have done and what we can learn from it. So evaluation is really important to further that. And I think this cartoon really illustrates the why. Why does something work well? Why doesn't something work well? And really understanding and exploring that is really important, because then we can integrate that into future co-design work and grow our collective capacity to co-design well and ultimately improve experiences and the outcomes.
So I love that analogy. Thank you, Louise. In realist evaluation, there's a basic assumption that interventions do not work in every context, or at least as Louise has said, they don't work the same way or with the same outcomes in every context. And so in realist evaluation, we seek to explore what works for whom, under what conditions. And there's a couple of components to that, including the for whom, the conditions, the what works. And that, if we go ahead to the next slide, we make some initial hypotheses around the answers to those questions. And so you don't go into realist evaluation with a blank slate. It's very theory informed. So up at the top, you'll see that hypothesis, and right off from there, you elicit and formulate, thanks for the moving mouse, a formulate theory on what is it about the program that works for whom in what circumstance. And we call that our initial program theory. And Sam's going to do a bit of a deeper dive using our case as an example to show you what our initial program theory was and talk to you a little bit about how we developed it. You would then collect your data. It's very often mixed methods data, so the exact data collected can look different for every project. And Sam, again, will give you the example for our project that is primarily qualitative data, but there's lots of examples in the literature in which quantitative data has been collected. In terms of data analysis, you want to be looking at your data as compared to your initial program theory. So you're going to look for any patterns to see which cannot be explained by the initial theory. So you're not going out solely just to prove your initial program theory, but also to really dig into those pieces for the program theory is not accounting for X. Given our program theory, this is surprising me. The theory holds here, but it doesn't hold here. So it's really asking those critical questions of your data and of your theory. And then you go right around to the theory testing. And given all of those questions that you're asking of your data, you would refine your initial CMO sequences. And I'll describe what those are on the next slide. So if you're familiar with realist evaluation, you're probably sick of hearing about those CMOs. We talk a lot about context, mechanism, and outcome. The context is broadly considered as the conditions that allow a phenomenon to occur. And that can include everything from time, space, physical resources, people resources and their capacity. And I think in my experience, that last bullet under the C is the most important, those networks that link people, events, and places together. Under mechanisms, these are often unseen elements that determine your outcomes. And so why, when we ask why is something working the way it works, it's very often these unseen forces that we try to elicit by digging in, by pre-identifying what we expect the mechanisms to be, and then by looking in the data to see what they are. Finally, our outcomes, they're, as I said, produced by this combination of context and mechanism. They can be either planned or unplanned. And what's fascinating to me is they can be positive or negative. So in my other research experiences, we typically name our desired outcome or positive outcome. We don't pay as much attention to the negative outcome. But in realist evaluation, we really specifically look for both. Next slide. Okay. So it sounds perhaps a lot more clear and distinct in terms of context, mechanism, and outcome than it turns out to be in real life. We've had a sub-team of our large program team working really diligently to try and identify from the literature, what is a mechanism, what is a context. We've had lots of in-depth conversation to say, is this a mechanism? Like, is trust a mechanism, or is trust an outcome? So it's really difficult, I think, to differentiate between all of these things. And there's a fair number of authors who would say that things can fall into more than one category. Something can be both a context and a mechanism. It can be both a mechanism and an outcome, depending on certain time points. Or there can be ripple or spillover effects where something might be a mechanism at one point, but it leads to these positive outcomes, such as capacity building down the way.
Thanks, Michelle and Louise. So Michelle and Louise have sort of talked about the sort of pieces behind realist evaluation. I'm going to walk you through sort of how we applied these, and then we'll reflect on sort of what that means in our context. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I guess like the big question for us was like, why did we use realist evaluation over other different evaluation types? If you've been kind of following, it seems quite linear, but it's also quite complex, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. And we know that co-design is also quite complex. The projects that we were collecting data from were thus by design, were also had a lot of moving pieces to them. So we were looking to understand this non-linear outcome. Co-design is really based in real life. And for that, a classical experimental design would not have been appropriate to determine if the co-design project influenced a substantial change or that outcome. So really, realist evaluation helped us to explore how these projects use co-design to understand their outcomes, which shaped health or social service change when the conditions were complex. So when there were lots of different interactions between these social systems that are going on that are just in this like sort of closed vacuum container of an experiment. So we use realist evaluation because we don't really know how co-design works to create these outcomes in different contexts. So that leads us to our research question. So we were really looking to understand, so what are those contexts, the mechanisms and the outcomes of enacting co-design with vulnerable populations to advance health and social services across different communities? So next slide, please. So Michelle sort of introduced this idea of a program theory, and a program theory, in my own terms, is just a kind of fancy way of saying what our hypotheses were about how co-design, so what we call the program, causes the outcomes. In realist evaluation, the program theory is used to test our expected causal relationships, which then get tweaked. So as you saw in the circular diagram that Michelle shared, and also with sort of what Louise was saying. So in this way, we can understand that our program theory includes those contextual background pieces, those elements in which the co-design projects take place, those mechanisms, those underlying pieces that we believe allow the change to take place. So what we are expecting that to happen through, and then those expected outcomes from the context and the mechanism. So a program theory can be informed through a variety of different sources. Michelle was saying mixed methods, and that's really what we dug into here. So we used published evidence from the literature, but also our own experiences as co-design practitioners and trainees, people who are living within these sort of co-design projects, case studies and reports. And so we're very much looking at what does this look like. So the development of our program theory was quite a long process, and it was staged. So we started with an initial review of the co-design literature. A small group from our team brainstormed what those contexts, those mechanisms, and those outcomes would be based on our experiences across different types of projects in different populations and communities, and sort of thinking about what are those common pieces of the context, the mechanisms, and the outcomes. That was brought back to our full team for feedback and revision. And then we got ethics review, we waited a little bit, and then dug right back into the co-design and realist evaluation literature. So we wanted to then move from this program theory into these sort of sequences. And that's a big component of the realist evaluation methodology, is thinking about how do we move from that program theory into these CMO sequences. So you'll hear that term used a lot around CMO, which is just those context mechanisms and outcomes. And that was really built on methodological guidance from the existing literature. And so that resulted in 4 CMO sequences, which built our program theory. So we've selected just a couple examples of what those C, M's, and O's look like. And so this isn't the full set of our component pieces, but I'll just sort of walk you through what these pieces are really quickly. But just know that we've spent a lot of time in the literature and thinking about our experiences to think through what these pieces might look like. So in the context piece, we're looking at the relationships. So the relationships of how people are connected and share their experiential knowledge, their skills. We wanted to know about the culture, those networks within the context that a project occurs. So what are the existing values in the setting? Are they committed to the co-design process? We looked at resources, so that infrastructure. So is there funding? Is there space for the co-design to occur in terms of setting up space for individuals to come that aren't just researchers? So they also, can they bring lived experience to that project? And then the last piece was around having this driving issue that's identified by the community as a priority. In terms of the mechanisms, we looked at things like interactions, these forces, so developing empathy and trust, and then power. And then moving to our last piece, the outcomes, we looked at outcomes on the individual basis in that relationship, that relational space, at the local systems level. So in terms of new structures or supports within an organization. And then if there were outcomes at the broader context, so were there policies or things in place that were because of the co-design process, but outside of sort of that local context. So that led to our program theory. And so we put these pieces together, sort of a left to right sort of sequencing and thinking about how these pieces connect. And we started with like those first 4 pieces of the context. And so really that identified community problems. So the first one is this: the community has a driving issue. That's the context that the co-design occurs in. And that unites people in working towards a shared goal. So a mechanism resulting in improved service experience. That's the first outcome. Resolution of the issue, the second, and broad uptake of ideas across sectors and policy contexts. So you can see that the sort of numbers and letters that are in brackets there, they signify what's a context. So C was the context. 1 meant that it was the first sequence. And then the sort of lowercase letter was the number that it occurred in the sequence. So our second sequence was around organizational infrastructure, and this focused on the resources available. So we talked about that organization has infrastructure, so things like funding, space, time, capability, ethics procedures, training, processes, influential people with skills and knowledge of co-design that were in place. So that's the setting that it occurs. And that creates a safe environment in which people feel supported and can be creative, resulting in new structures, procedures, and policies in the system that are supported by resources and built capacity to engage in further co-design. Our third looked at this relationship, so that experiential knowledge network. So people who have diverse experiential knowledge and skills are connected by fostering creative spaces and activities, so those mechanisms, and developing empathy and trust, which results in a new understanding of one another's perspective, new ways of interrelating between each other, and empowerment. And our final one was around the culture. So this idea that the co-design occurs in a culture that values and embodies commitment, openness, authenticity, and respect to center lived experiences. And that allows people all people to embrace vulnerability, critique, and transparency to express their needs and feel heard, resulting in a shared commitment and a feeling of being part of a collective. So that was quite a lot, but I will briefly just share sort of how we did this through a multiple case study. So we purposefully selected 4 to 5 cases, and those varied across different sort of topics and project sort of numbers of how big or small the projects were. And we collected 3 different types of data. So the first one was around organizational documents. And those really helped to provide sort of the context in which the co-design was occurring. And this often included like team meetings or when there was a co-design sort of event in the community. Observations. So that was the second type of data. And we observed different co-design events, such as stakeholder meetings that were either discussing the co-design process or the outcomes of the co-design. And the last piece was around interviews. So we conducted interviews with key stakeholders who were involved in that co-design process. So the next slide shows our case study sites, and this is just a really high level overview of the 4 case sites. And you can see that we've already collected a variety of data across diverse projects from youth and secondary education, mental health, critical care, community homelessness. And we've really followed the lead from these sites and have worked together to ensure that we're collecting the right type of data that would result in a rich understanding of how that co-design works. So we weren't always looking for how it worked correctly, but what were the challenges and what were you experiencing in that co-design process? And lastly, I'll just share our sort of early findings. So kind of where we're at right now is we've built a coding structure. We've taken those CMO sequences and built them into a structure that we can apply in terms of qualitative data analysis. And so we've worked as a group to operationalize and define each code. So collaborating to work through the transcripts, and some of our early reflections on that is that it can be a real challenge to distinguish, like Michelle said, between process-related mechanisms and outcomes. So is establishing a trust something that it happens through, or is it actually an outcome of the co-design? We have done some early work to think about everyone involved and the relationships between those, and it would appear to be an important context to do this work around the skills and the training, and that these are all connected to one another, and that was important to each of the sites, it seems. So relationship building and people having the skills and capacity to participate are seem to be really important, but we're still working through kind of this piece. And I will hand it off to Louise to provide a bit more of some reflections of how we're working through this.
Thank you, Sam. Sandra, you're on the exact right slide. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, you're good. So I'm sure you're all digesting because that was a lot. And I will say that I kind of was part in the very, very early when proposals for some of those projects at the different sites were coming in, but didn't really join the realist evaluation until after the data had been gathered and really trying to figure out what the process of what to do with the data, how that was going to look. And so some of the stuff I'll share here are things that Michelle and Sam contributed, and some are things that I've added in since I've been involved. Certainly, and you probably noticed the green check marks and the red X's based on what kind of data was in so far, that some of the sites were significantly impacted by COVID and their ability to recruit and do the in-person work that was really the best format for the work that they were trying to do. COVID also impacted a lot of changes and modifications to the studies, and so that took time for ethics revisions. And so really, we already know co-design takes more time on different things that maybe some other formats of research don't require. The collaboration that was mentioned, certainly in looking through the data and figuring out the code book, there was a lot of discussion and validation within our team at every stage of the project, and in particularly in doing the code book and figuring out what those CMOs would look like. I really noticed, and I think we all noticed, but it really stood out for me, the complexity and interconnectedness of the elements being evaluated, and Michelle mentioned that, and there's different things that can count in more than one area, or they're just so closely linked that it's very dependent on the situation. It's the chicken and the egg scenario. Certainly having the multiple different perspectives involved meant that we had nuanced and different understandings that really drew out the richness of the data, because we noticed things differently and interpreted what it might mean, and then how we could shape some of the codes and the sequences to kind of describe what we thought we were seeing, just to kind of give us a framework. We did lots of circling back to earlier understandings that we had developed in the codes, and kind of revised and reconsidered things as we worked through. And so that meant that it was sometimes tricky to balance the time and attention that went into the nuance, and still leaving space for things to evolve, because at that point, we're not trying to have conclusions. We're just trying to make a framework that'll help us in the coding and understanding what we're seeing. So the recommendations that kind of come from this is definitely allow lots of time, and ensure that you've got all your stakeholder partners, especially people with lived experience, included early and throughout the entire project or process. Plan for and leave time for the challenges that are going to come up, including in recruitment or revisions, and ensure that everyone has sufficient understanding of realist evaluation or evaluation in general, wherever their starting place is, in order to feel included and able to contribute. Our hub had a really nice presentation around what realist evaluation was, and that was certainly helpful for me, because it was a new and different way of looking at things from my experience. Certainly get your stuff into ethics as soon as possible, knowing it might take more time for approval. There might be more questions back and things that you have to respond to. And Sam certainly described this, having multiple forms of data collection, so that you've got that variety there. Some sources or types of data were more relevant for some sites than others. Be prepared to revisit your definitions and concepts as you go. And certainly, did I say, we allow lots and lots of time. I can't tell you how often. I think maybe we had 3 meetings in a row that all had the same title with a slight variation. This is the final review. Defining the codes. Okay, no, we'll need one more meeting. Oh, we'll need one more meeting. And but being able to have that flexibility meant that we could make sure we were really being intentional and thoughtful in how things were framed. And certainly be open to where the data takes you. Things may emerge that don't fit with that program theory, those hypotheses that you kind of set out, and that's okay. The program theory is kind of like a map that gives you directions through a place that you haven't been to yet. And once you're there, you may see things looking different.
I'm going to end us off. I think we have shared a lot of sort of details around this really complex way of evaluation, but it's a really rich and nuanced way that we can understand co-design while being really intentional. And we really, I think, can stress this idea of taking our time to be intentional in understanding what those contexts, those mechanisms, and those outcomes are at each of our sites. We've encountered some challenges, but really we're at this phase where we're really excited about what we're seeing. We're really understanding what's in the literature and excited about our next steps. our data collection is ongoing. It's a bit rolling, as you've seen some of the challenges that have come up and sort of the things that we're sort of course correcting and moving and working with, and while being flexible. So that data collection is happening at different time points at these different projects throughout each of that at that site. And so we're as that sort of rolls in and we're applying those codes, we're going to be doing that with the current data set and seeing how that fits with the new information that we're seeing as well. Sort of after that, after we've gotten through all of the data that we've been collecting, we will plan to write this up and disseminate it through manuscripts, presentations, and education. And so this is sort of like one of our first stops along the way in disseminating this information. So thanks so much for listening to our presentation. We'd love to hear more about if you're doing co-design, if these things are resonating with you.
So our plan was to move right into developmental evaluation, but I feel like I need to pause. And I don't know if there are a couple of comments we'll maybe take now. Again, as we go through the presentations, if things occur to you, please pop them in the chat if you have questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. But before we move on, I don't know if people have some comments or questions for this team around realist evaluation. Go ahead, Michelle.
Going back to your slides, there was a particular slide when you were kind of describing the kind of context and mechanisms and the kind of program theory, and that just to say that really resonated with me in terms of the sentences and the descriptions of them. So yeah, I could see that process you're thinking and could definitely apply it to some of our projects.
Yeah, this idea that the findings resonate. And I don't know if that's a piece of the realist evaluation. Is that, if we talk about quality of doing the work, I don't know if you got there yet, but.
Yes, so in two ways, Sandra. I think we're checking within our team at multiple time points. Like I said, we have a smaller group of us who have been really in the weeds with this, and then we bring it back to our larger interdisciplinary team at key moments to say, is this working for you? Does this work in your context? Can we have a bit of an outside view on this? So there's that side, and then also going back to our case study sites to say, we have initial and follow-up interviews with the key project leads to say, here's how we've interpreted your data. Here's how it's compared to the other sites. Here's how it's fitting or not fitting within the theory. Is this resonating with you? What have we missed? Onwards.
And there's another question in the chat from Hussein about, is the realist evaluation limited to qualitative design? Because I think what you've described is very qualitative. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Not hear me? Now can you? Okay, it's Sandra and I, it's our combo. So no, it's not limited to qualitative work. And I would say, but correct me if other people think differently, that I've seen more examples where there's quantitative measures included, especially when you look at those outcomes and determining if the program is effective. That's more often done with at least some quantitative measurement. However, for our application in designing health and social services, we're more interested in the design process and whether or not co-design was working for people, not working for people, and that doesn't have a very good associated quantitative outcome measure that would fit multiple cases. And so we've chosen 3 different forms of qualitative data analysis, but in the literature, there's very often quantitative data collected.
Hussein, does that answer your question, or did you want to add something to that?
Thank you, Sandra. I just wanted to ask if there are any examples that are in the team at the moment about using quantitative measures for realist evaluation. Would it be satisfaction rates or self-efficacy or something like that? or it is primarily related to collecting information iteratively from the major stakeholders, whether things are working for them or not?
I can just talk, but if somebody else wants to, like, flag me. So Hussein, it's a good question. I think a realist evaluation is used in so many different contexts that the specific outcome measurements would be really dependent on the project context and the desired outcome. So it could be used, for example, in a hospital to decrease wait times for service. And that might be one of their indicators of positive outcome, is a decrease in wait time, which is quite quantitative. But if you're looking for a project that looks at reshaping policy, for example, then they might have very different set of quality indicators associated with those changes. It's just, I don't think that there is one common outcome tool or outcome measure that's used in realist evaluation or in co-design. I think they need to be so tailored for each individual project.
Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving along. Avra, I see your question and I'm going to hold it because we're actually going to move to a different type of evaluation of co-design work, which is a developmental evaluation approach. And I want to revisit that question because this is a very different approach to evaluation. So I'm going to invite Alexis and Ray to jump in, and I will turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Sandra. Can you hear me okay? Great. So my name is Alexis Butkin, and I will be presenting with Ray, who introduced herself at the beginning of our session. But I am primarily a community-based, community-engaged researcher with about a decade of experience in program evaluation and partnership with health and social service providers and governments. I'm also a member of the McMaster Co-Design Hub team, and I came to this work to support the developmental evaluation of the hub itself, with an interest in conducting practical, useful evaluation to support greater inclusion of historically marginalized people. So what I'm going to do today is a brief overview to describe developmental evaluation in relation to co-design work, followed by a concrete example of how we use this approach for the McMaster Co-Design Hub. What I love about this approach is that it really embraces flexibility and ambiguity and all the sort of surprises that you might get along the way in doing co-design work, much like some of the examples that was shared in the last presentation. So what is on your screen now is an image of a road sign with 3 arrows going in different directions, all that say maybe left, maybe straight, maybe right. Not quite sure where we're going or how we're going to get there. So when you do not have an established theory of change and the path is unclear, when you don't have predetermined activities or outcomes, this is where developmental evaluation can be really supportive in helping think through what those might be and capturing unique perspectives and forms of data to support that. Next slide, please. So what is developmental evaluation? Developmental evaluation is primarily a non-traditional approach to evaluation that goes beyond pre-post tests, beyond cost-benefit analyses and objective measures of performance. It captures the subjective nature of work that aims to promote social change. So developmental evaluation embraces ambiguity and flexibility in the process and expected outcomes of an initiative, as well as in the evaluation process itself to emphasize innovation and continuous learning. Developmental evaluation focuses on 2 main streams of data. One is to assist in verifying certain decisions, approaches, or assumptions, as well as to document the innovation process along the way. So in developmental evaluation, it's a bit unique. Oh, go back please to the last slide. Thanks. So the evaluator can be positioned both as like an insider and an outsider in a program or project. So the evaluator could be hired externally but then observe and contribute to team meetings and establish a relatively close connection with the team to understand their work really deeply. So this approach can support teams to become clearer about their goals and the processes and structures needed to support them, while allowing for like the dynamics and flexibility of a developmental process. So basically, developmental evaluation, or DE as it's called sometimes, works without a predetermined set of activities and outcomes, which works well with the participatory and evolving nature of co-design work. Next slide now, please, Sandra. How do you do developmental evaluation? To be responsive to the program or project being evaluated, it's really critical to actively involve stakeholders in the evaluation design and in the process. So this could mean like program and project team members, key beneficiaries of the initiative, and other key stakeholders who influence the process or outcomes of the program or project. In terms of methods, there's a lot of flexibility. A DE approach uses the most appropriate and practical sources of data. So this can include meeting notes, emails, check-in conversations, which isn't really like an interview, but conversations with team members and key stakeholders about what's going on, observations and project documents. So specific methods, measures, and tools can be developed quickly and change over time as outcomes and priorities emerge and the project or program unfolds or adapts to new circumstances and information. So data collection and analysis also occurs simultaneously with action. It's a participatory analysis process that's used to share evaluation findings with the team and other key stakeholders using real-time feedback and diverse user-friendly forms of reporting. So this could mean short reports, accessible knowledge dissemination and exchange, and considerations of the various lived experiences and learning styles of the team. So really wanting to make sure that the information that's coming out of the evaluation is useful to everybody and not just to those who might be familiar with evaluation or research or with the technicalities of the program itself. Next slide, please. So why use developmental evaluation in co-design? It fits in a lot of ways, primarily because it's compatible with the principles of collaboration, complexity, reflexivity, and emergent outcomes. Developmental evaluation is very much aligned with those values and principles, as is co-design work. It's especially useful for active engagement of stakeholders in designing and evaluating an innovation. So when doing co-design work and trying to make meaningful change, it's also good to engage people and checking in and saying, are we doing that? How's it going? Is this making an impact? What's working, what's not working? Before you get to the end of the project. So it tracks the evolution of a project or program and ongoing development of theories of change to promote really strategic decision-making through like regular check-ins with the project and program team to assess where they were, where they are now, and where they want to go. But developmental evaluation really doesn't always work in every context. So even though I really like this approach, I don't want to sell it as something that always works in complicated situations. It requires team members to be very open to reflexive practice and critical thinking, and committed to actively engaging in an iterative, ongoing evaluation process. Without that, it can be much more challenging. So Sandra, next slide. So some of the challenges with developmental evaluation, even when you have a really open-minded team and a good context in which to do this work, it still can be an ongoing long-term commitment to evaluation. It's hard to say when the evaluation begins and when it ends because it kind of follows along with the development and evolution of a program or project, which means that you can potentially have a huge volume of data to work with, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do with it and how to prioritize it and what matters and what doesn't matter and what's going to really help the team with their strategic decision-making. So specifying the scope of the evaluation can be difficult when it's unclear what it's going to look like as it evolves, when it's unclear what the program or project looks like, which is where the need for regular check-ins and sort of a closer connection between the person responsible for the evaluation and the rest of the team are engaged and checking in on a regular basis. But because there is this more kind of intimate connection here with evaluation and program development, there are power differentials when deciding how to prioritize issues. When you have potentially a huge amount of data and trying to figure out where to go with the project, where to go with the evaluation, you know, there might be key stakeholders that have more or less power in that sort of decision-making process, and whose priorities do you prioritize, and how do you go forward. So there's the evaluator also needs to work within that dynamic as well and support the team to critically look at whose needs and interests are being prioritized over others and who's missing. So it's a flexible approach, which also does not necessarily fit well with funding requirements that often need a clear logic model or framework with very clear activities, outcomes, and indicators in terms of how you're going to make the impact that you are asking for money for in order to achieve. So even though it doesn't fit in well with that, it is and co-design work doesn't necessarily fit in with that either, but the developmental evaluation offers is a rigorous approach to assessing that ambiguity and checking in along the way. And you might propose certain activities and outcomes, but they may change over time, and developmental evaluation allows for that. So I'm just going to pause there. That's an overview of developmental evaluation, and pass it over to my partner, Ray, to see if she has anything, questions or comments to add to that.
I've learned so much already this morning, Alexis, and I just wanted to ask you if you found any differences in terms of partnerships where you've had people who are newly engaged or people who are highly engaged, whether that has shifted some of the process a little bit.
Newly engaged, you mean with people, new people coming into a project?
Yeah, like people who've never had an
Oh.
experience with partnership before or co-design.
Yeah, they have a hard time with this, I would say, you know, but what developmental evaluation does is assist the team who's busy doing, you know, challenging, complicated work, to have documentation and a record of what they've done, and how they've made decisions along the way, in order to show new partners who maybe aren't as familiar or as comfortable with that approach that there is a strategy here. It's just an evolving, living strategy, and this is what we've done along the way to support that process.
That makes a lot of sense. That was my one question for this morning so far.
Okay, great, thanks. So in getting to concretely what this looked like, I'll talk about this DE approach in co-design work, and a quick overview of what we did for the McMaster co-design hub for structurally vulnerable populations. So this is, the hub's been mentioned a few times, and for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a growing collective of people from various walks of life, various sectors, people with different lived experiences who are interested in thinking about how we advance co-design processes and methods. So I joined the hub, familiar with some of the hub team members, and a mutual interest in participatory work and in promoting greater inclusion and social change, particularly in health and social services. So when the developmental evaluation started, it began by looking at and thinking about the initial proposal about creating a hub. And it was, the developmental evaluation was driven by challenges in specifying the hub's activities and outcomes in advance of its further implementation. So the hub's initial goals were quite broad: to engage, to educate, and to innovate. And we wanted to engage community stakeholders in identifying priorities and approaches to implementation to ensure we were responsive to the needs of our target audience. So equity-seeking, equity-deserving communities, trainees, people who use services, service providers, researchers, and policymakers, and so on. So to do the developmental evaluation, we thought that what we really needed was to articulate a theory of change to start off with, to start thinking through what these things look like. And we used various sources of data, so observations, meeting notes. We also did some focus group cafes, conversation cafes, to talk with people who have had experience in co-design work, either as somebody who uses services or a service provider or as a researcher. And we gathered information from evaluation surveys as well, like feedback forms that included some quantitative data on people's experiences with the workshops and speaker series that were already underway. So on the screen here, I just have an image of some somebody writing something on a piece of paper as we were thinking through our ideas, and the icons that were used in the initial proposal for the project, which is like an image of people sitting together, somebody pointing to a screen or a board, and an image of a light bulb with sparks coming out of it, let's say, to represent innovation. Next slide, please. So to help us articulate the activities and goals of the hub, we used arts-based and storytelling methods to visualize stakeholder experiences and perspectives in the co-creation of the hub. So essentially co-designing the co-design hub. So for example, we used focus group cafes, online cafes, with participants, including people with lived experience, various health and social service providers and researchers, and asked them to come to these cafes and bring an object to depict their experience with co-design. So this was shared at the outset of our cafes to spark conversations about the opportunities and challenges in co-design. And then we used an experience-based co-design approach to capture stakeholders' ideas for the hub and how we might advance co-design to promote system change. So on the screen here are images of what we created during those online cafes. There were 2 of them that we held. And so we used Google Jamboard. So in the top left of the screen is an image of the Google Jamboard that we used, where we asked people how might we advance co-design processes, and people went through thinking about how to prioritize different issues. And then underneath that is some visual imagery that we used to prototype some solutions to the challenges that were identified throughout our conversations. And then on the right of the screen is the recommendations that came from participants for the hub, and some strategies to achieve those that we wrote up in a table form. Next screen, please. Next slide. So after these sessions and looking at all the data that we had collected in various forms, we came up with this sort of linear looking, text heavy, box heavy image as an initial theory of change to think through what we ultimately wanted to do. So in using a developmental evaluation approach and in developing a theory of change, you start with thinking about what your ultimate goal is, and then you work backwards from there to consider the preconditions that are necessary in order to achieve that goal, and then what's necessary to achieve those preconditions, and then what's necessary to achieve those preconditions, and what activities do we need to do in order to do that. So here you can see at the top that we were able to identify our goal, which was to see consistent, equitable partnership and meaningful engagement of marginalized service users in all aspects of identifying, conceptualizing, planning, implementing, and evaluating health and social services, which really rolls off the tongue. It was not very pithy, and we, in looking at this, we thought it needs to be a little bit more dynamic and reflect the sort of evolutionary nature of co-design. So next slide, please. So we hired a graphic designer to help us with that process. And the inspiration for the theory of change graphic came in a variety of different mediums. Ideas for conceptualizing these themes included a journey map depicting the co-design hub journey at the micro level, individual level, the meso or community organizational level, and then the macro level, thinking about the system change we wanted to achieve as well. And then there are rainbow flow rings showing multiple perspectives and individual journeys laced into different rings where stakeholders meet at different points within that ring. So a draft of this process of developing a more dynamic looking theory of change is shown on the screen here with a lot of squiggly lines, and you can see how we all kind of took turns trying to draw online and coming up with something a little bit more colorful and circular and ongoing looking. The next slide, please. After all that, we came up with our current final visualization of the hub theory of change. And I say final in terms of how we think about this as an evolving living thing. But this is what we have right now in terms of the articulation of what we want to do. So it shows the hub and the communities engaged in this process as the heart of system transformation. So the hub's now 4 overlapping foci, which is now education, evaluation, innovation, and engagement, are key drivers in the process of health and social service change. And the progression of the 3 circles here, so going from smaller to bigger, from left to right, the progression of the circle shows the amplification of the hub's work over time. So moving between the micro, the meso, and the macro levels, and affecting greater impact with broader reaching health and social service systems. And then you'll see what is in this image too, if you can see it, is in the first circle, there's images of 2 people there, and then the second circle there's 4 people, and then in the next one we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so people. So the idea is that we're growing in size in terms of numbers of people and in our reach through our networks and the collective impact we hope to have. So now our end goal statement is to transform health and social systems through inclusive co-design, which is a little bit shorter and easier to digest. Next slide, please, Sandra. And yeah, that's it. So thank you very much for listening. Now I've just got some references and resources here from some of the publications we've produced about this process to support anyone who might be interested in doing something similar, and some of the key foundational documents on how to do developmental evaluation. So I'm going to pass it back to Ray again to see if she has any reflections or responses or questions.
Thanks, Alexis. I have to say, one impression I get as someone with lived experience is that I appreciate so much with that graphic a sense of belonging in each other's lives that really comes from that. And I think that is something that's so translatable in a variety of ways. I was recently writing about what it would mean to build a building conducive to research partnerships and co-design and things like that, and what it would mean to feel welcome in that building, not that like you are a guest. So to think about mobilizing in that format when it comes to evaluation, that just feels like just another step in a very positive direction for me. I'm not sure if my thoughts there resonate with you as well.
Yeah, I think that's why we went from the boxes and the straight lines to this more circular notion and this idea of coming together, and I don't know, when I imagine a collective, I imagine something a little bit more circular. When you have meetings and you want to talk to one another, you don't tend to not want to sit at, long tables, but you want to try to sit in a circle somehow, and then I think about sharing circles and how great that is, and conversation circles and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Absolutely. I even think about philosophies such as two-eyed seeing within Indigenous communities as well too, and how that really talks about a sense of togetherness, but also seeing wisdom coming from different directions and things like that. That to me, that really just speaks to that as well too.
Yeah, and I think that fits well with the principles of developmental evaluation, which is very much about knowledge sharing, and seeing expertise in various people, and taking a step back to reflect and then come back and reflect and come back, and giving time that's needed in order to do that meaningfully and well, and engaging, really authentically engaging people, and being intentionally accessible as well.
Love that.
I got that word from you. I like that word. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for all of your insights here this morning. I feel like I've come away with a lot as well too.
Thanks, Ray. I think that wraps it up for us then.
And I remember that image, we were very conscious of having people at the center, right? People are at the center of all of this work. So that was another piece of that, that puzzle. So a couple of things. This is time for Q&A. I know someone had asked about the slides and contact information for, we do post on our website, and if someone can find the website and pop the link in our chat, that would be great. So we do record all of our webinars and post them on our website. And there will be a form at the end where we'll ask how you'd like to continue to be involved with the Hub. So we're always, that idea of growing is very much a part of our work. So again, stay tuned for that as well. Thank you. We're a good team. So what I want to do now is open the floor to you. Spend the next 15 minutes or so and talk a little bit about evaluation. What are your experiences with evaluation? What are your questions around evaluation? We have a Jamboard, I think, that we've opened. I think the link is in the chat there. Some of the things we were thinking of, what should we be evaluating with this co-design work? That's on one page of the Jamboard. And then opportunities and challenges in trying to do equity-based evaluation. So those are some things, questions we have for you. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Jamboards. I can maybe stop sharing and show you a little bit with Jamboards if those of you aren't familiar. We've been, you know, in COVID, we had to get inventive around how we were going to engage and dialogue together. And so one of the tools that we found was Jamboard because it's free. And so for those of you, if you click on the link, you'll see there's two pages. One is around what outcomes should we be tracking, and the other is evaluation challenges and opportunities. And to post on the Jamboard, you just click on a sticky note and say, put one word on the sticky note and pop it on the board. And so it's kind of a chance for, I think Alexis showed an example of the Jamboard. So you just need to move them around so you can see them. We can organize them. You can change the color of your sticky note as well. You can make it green or pink or orange. And so yeah, please just pop in your ideas on either of those questions about what should we be tracking and or your experiences around challenges and opportunities. So you can do that, or we can also have a bit of a discussion. If there's questions people have or comments or your own experiences, this is our opportunity to do that.
Maybe if I could just jump in for a second and say, for anyone who isn't comfortable in using the Jamboard, you know, we can have this discussion, or if you would like to participate in the Jamboard, but don't want to do it yourself, just ask somebody to do that for you. Say, can we make this a sticky note? And we can do that.
Yeah, so pop in the chat, say, I'd like to say this, and we can put it on a sticky note for you. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll go back to the question that Avra talked about. How do you think choosing a particular evaluation design, I think it was really for the realist evaluation group, choosing that approach, realist evaluation approach, impacted your findings compared with a different design that you might have used? And I don't know if you could speak to that maybe first.
I can try. I was just waiting to see if Sam or Louise wanted to chime in. Please add. So for me, I think that the realist evaluation really allowed us to get deep into the richness and the complexity of identifying at a really specific level the various contexts, then the mechanisms and the outcomes as associated with each project. And when I've done other evaluation projects that haven't used this approach, we've been much more narrow in terms of our description of the context in which the work is occurring, not really thinking through the time, the space, the resource, the people, the networks, how all of those pieces fit together. We've also been limited and inflexible in terms of the outcomes that we are looking for. So there are the initial set of outcomes very often that are identified at the start of the project. When you put in your grant, you identify them at epics, and then that's what you stick with for the rest of the project. And it didn't allow for the flexibility or complexity that we expected to see in terms of this set of project outcomes, especially with a multi-site case study where there's different populations, different targets, different environments for each project. We really needed something that would allow us to iteratively look for what are the surprising outcomes here, what are the negative outcomes here. So to me, realist evaluation was a very good fit for allowing us to be able to do that. And I'm not sure what other methodologies would have given us that same opportunity.
I'll just sort of add to that, Michelle. And I think I'll just be real. It's been hard. It's been really challenging. And I think that it's allowed us the space to think about these underlying mechanisms that are so important in this work, and thinking about all of those pieces that we aren't able to sort of capture in traditional outcome measures, and thinking about all of the pieces that are happening in the sort of bigger system of, rather than just this one project has this thing happens and this is the outcome and it's very linear. And we know that's not the case in co-design. So I think this approach has challenged us to really think about all of these other things that are going on, and that co-design, the outcome isn't just this one piece that we're sort of like trying to capture and then taking it off and saying that that's great that we did it and moving on. But I think it's allowed for that space to be able to think about all those things as a group and collectively sort of unpack all of what that means.
I would like to add to that too. I think that the underlying principles in realist evaluation is very much centered in what can we learn, what are we building on, and what can we continue to build. And that's really about the learning process. So as Sam and Michelle were both describing, that you're not starting with something you're trying to prove. You're not assuming this is the outcome, this is the result, this is the conclusion, and we're going to seek proof for that. You're actually saying, we think, or we'd like to know about this. We want to understand this. We want to be able to describe what we see, what happens, and understand why. And that means being open to the learning. And I think that that's really, really important, because in co-design, when you're involving people with lived experience or communities, it ensures that there's always flexibility in how we're looking at things, and it doesn't become this us and them debate in a conversation of, well, this is what I see from my lived experience perspective, and trying to find a way for that to fit with the researcher's perspective, because we're actually all coming from the same place of, we don't really know, we're trying to understand, we have some thoughts, and we're all open. And certainly I would say that not everyone is ready for that, and it's not for everyone, and it requires, when we talk about ensuring all the elements of safety for people with lived experience, especially those who've experienced harms in systems and structures, that we want to ensure that there is space for people to be heard, and for learning to happen that's valuable for them and includes the knowledge and expertise that they have, and what different things you can explore together. And I think that was really helpful in actually in the realist evaluation, but in the developmental evaluation process as well, that Alexis talked about, where it really is about learning and being able to adjust as we learn together.
I'm going to just bring up the Jamboard here, because this shows you what we can do. So in terms of outcomes we should be tracking, I'm just observing here that you can start to cluster different ideas together. And I think people often naturally cluster, but we're starting to see some things around relationship, inclusion, power, trust, new collaborations, connection, relationships. There's also some things about harm, redressing historical harms, moving through discord. It isn't always easy work. Again, looking at vision, how do we move towards these visions? And there's some lovely examples here I'm seeing of, where do we want to go around just, equitable services, changes outside of the immediate project? How do we kind of move beyond material changes in people's lives, dialogue, engagement? So this is lovely in terms of, what is important? What do we need to really understand when we're doing this equity-based co-design work? And then if you have this little arrow at the top here, there's sort of evaluation challenges and opportunities that we've started to talk about here. I think people have talked about time, safety, security, capturing different perspectives, prioritizing. We've sort of had people can pop, if you want, some sticky notes here, but we've started to talk about some of these challenges and opportunities, and how do you capture people's voices in a meaningful way? How do you ensure that what people are saying will actually move forward? So again, please feel free to continue to populate this. Avra, I see your notes. So again, hopefully that's helpful. These are two very different approaches to evaluation. I know we're going to move to a break in a moment, but was there any last questions or comments people have around these different approaches to evaluation? Everyone's head is full. Is that our job?
Sandra, I think both approaches are very sympathetic. You are in the group, you are doing it while things are emerging. So I think both are quite useful in co-production or co-design. And maybe just try and try what fits best because I'm not sure which one is the best. I think you can use both. But they're sympathetic, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've done them in different ways. So as a hub team, we wanted to have this developmental evaluation. How have we evolved as a team? And then the realist evaluation was really interesting because we said, there's very different co-design projects happening out there. Is there an underlying CMO sequences that we need to capture across different projects? So even though projects are very different, are there common elements or core things we want to capture across different approaches? So that was a little bit of how we thought about them differently, I think, in terms of how we do that. So
maybe,
yeah, go ahead, Alexis.
Oh, sorry. I think maybe I can add. I think the no approach is better or worse than another. I think it's just depending on the context in which the program or project is operating in. But I think what's really cool about these two particular approaches is that they take that context into a lot of consideration in assessing the outcomes and the impacts and the activities of the work, which is so helpful when working with people from different places and spaces.
And one is very flexible and emergent, and the other is sort of also flexible and emergent, but much more structured in terms of the terminology and how it's very theory driven and going back and testing the theory. They're quite different feel, I think, in terms of how you might approach evaluation. So I think the examples are helpful in terms of illustrating that. So I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute stretch break and come back here at 10:30. What we're going to do for the next part of our time together is we're going to talk about now what? What if we're talking about prototypes? How do we do equity-based co-design? What have we learned along the way? And then how do you want to be engaged? If any of you are engaged, want to be engaged in this work going forward, what are some of the exciting things on the horizon? So stay tuned, but I'm going to suggest that we turn off your cameras, take a stretch break, a bio break, and come back here at 10:30. Although I just said that and people are different time zones around the world. So in 10 minutes, whatever 10 minutes looks like for you, come back at that time and we'll reconnect. Thank you.
You can stop recording, Sandra.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Here we go. Hello. So what we're going to do now is talk about next steps and where do we go from here. Before I dive into that, I do just want to go back to the Jamboard and say a couple of things. Oh gosh, I can't find it now. Where is it? I think this is it. One of the things that we always do as a team is we keep everything. When we have these opportunities to interact and hear from people that are out there doing this work, is we often kind of go back to things that we've learned along the way. It's been a real learning journey for us. And so, sometimes, I love this. People put check marks on things that are really important in this Jamboard. So, evaluation challenges and opportunities, I try to kind of coordinate a little bit. These are key messages we hear over and over again. Ensuring we're evaluating what people want us to know and understand, building time for relationship, inclusion of diverse voices, creating safe spaces, people used to having power, letting go of that, shifting power, vulnerability, safer, braver spaces we talk about. And then some of these real challenges around time lags of how do we move from input to actually creating system change. The ongoing challenges around that. How do we get funder buy-in for these non-traditional approaches? How do we maintain momentum and energy? So all of these things are so important to doing this work. It's exciting, wonderful, build meaningful relationships, but also challenging and to understand those things. So again, just want to say that we will certainly keep these and they will continue to help us to learn and to grow in doing this work. Okay, oops, stop share. Why is that not working? There we go. Now I've lost you. Where's my Zoom? So next steps, where do we go from here? I want to do a couple of things over the next 40 minutes or so together. And we'd like to hear from you along the way. So again, as we go through, please feel free to use the chat or chime in if you have comments or suggestions. We wanted to start with a little bit of a reflection on the CoPro symposium that we had in August. It was a 3-day in-person event at Six Nations in Ontario, and numbers of people on this call. We had people from around the world that joined us, were part of that event, and I'm going to invite Alexa to talk to us a little bit about some of the learnings that we've gained, and I think she's going to give us a bit of context for that as well. So Alexa, I'll turn it over to you. And you can introduce yourself as well.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexa, and I'm an Indigenous woman of both Nuu-chah-nulth and settler descent, and I'm also a member of the CoPro team. So between the dates of the 24th of August and the 26th of August, we hosted the CoPro2022 symposium at the gathering place at the Grand on Six Nations of the Grand River. So for those of you that may be out of the country or unfamiliar with Six Nations, it's an Indigenous reserve near Caledonia, Ontario. And we had the privilege of hosting such a beautiful event with people from all over the world, as Sandra mentioned. So we can go over to the next slide now. During this event and following the event, and still currently, I guess, we're collecting evaluation forms from our participants. And as you can see, especially near the bottom, the graph shows that over the 3-day event, people really enjoyed themselves and believed that it was a good use of their time. We can go to the next slide. We also collected some important qualitative data from these evaluation forms. Some of the quotes are that people recommended we collect the feedback daily for immediate improvement the next day that would act as co-production in action. One person said that we should ensure that it does not become a large form, as the size, the venue, and careful planning were key to the form's success. And although the organizers tried their best to involve participants from various backgrounds, it was not possible to achieve. So in subsequent forms, it might be useful to think of how to involve more people from early on. We can go to the next, thank you. So during this event, we offered some experiential workshops that allowed our participants to unpack creativity and its role in co-design. And 2 of these workshops were our arts-based approaches to inclusive co-design and our 2-row wampum agreement workshop. So for our arts-based approach workshop, we had some of our members lead poetry, dance, and I actually led our beading workshop. And as for the 2-row wampum agreement workshop, participants had the honor of canoeing and kayaking on the Grand River. And the 2-row wampum belt is a representation of a treaty that was signed by Haudenosaunee and European settlers. And it has 2 purple rows running along the belt to represent 2 boats, one a boat of the Haudenosaunee people and one of the settlers, on the water in harmony. So this workshop was extremely well received. As you can see, participants felt better informed about these topics, and also felt that these workshops would make a difference to them in their work. There's 2 quotes in the center, one mentioning that beading outside was a beautiful balance to the morning, and poetry and dancing moved this person to tears, and someone that participated in the 2-row wampum agreement workshop mentioned that connecting with strangers in nature is powerful. Right, on to the next. So our next workshop unpacks new ways of thinking and learning in the context of co-design. And we had an Indigenous way of knowing workshop to teach us about the importance of water in Indigenous knowledge, and a digital storytelling workshop that encouraged us to dig deeper into ourselves, and as quoted here, allow ourselves new learning. And as we can see, like the last workshop, people also felt like they were better informed and personally or professionally impacted by such workshops. We have another quote here that says, "Thank you. I was completely moved by both parts of the workshops. Being called to dig deep and open ourselves to new learning was amazing."
One of the other things that we did in the workshop is we did some work in small tables around what does inclusive co-design look like. There was a number of different prototypes created, and they were on worksheets, and I don't know if Li Chen is here, but she has transformed them into visuals that we are going to start to write up. These are 3, I think there was 6 of them, really thinking about what are these elements of inclusive co-design that we need to pay attention to, and lots of really rich learning from these very different metaphors. The ones here are kind of a flower, a house, a social movement, and ongoing messages, I think, around inclusivity, trust, consent, transforming systems, how we need to listen, observe, build capacity, build relationships. So again, this is some work that our team that we're at the event will continue to do in terms of writing up these prototypes, and what are the messages and things that we need to get out in the field in terms of thinking about this notion of inclusive design in a different way and really rich way. And so I think one of the pieces here was the value of arts-based approaches. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, literally, in terms of trying to unpack this really important way of doing work differently. And I don't know if anybody from who was there wants to comment on this further, but again, this is some work that we will continue to do together. One of the things that emerged from this event was this notion of a charter. And Jillian is here, I know, on the line. This was her brainstorm at 4 in the morning. I was in the cabin with her. I'm like, okay, Jillian, I was sleeping, you were up thinking about things. But, part of this is a vision of if people want to do equity-based co-creation, inclusive co-design work, what are things that we need to commit to in doing this work better? And if we could pop in the chat, it may already be there, the link to the charter in full. It is. Oh, amazing, Alexa. So this is a visual representation of the different pieces of things that we should commit to doing this work better. And do we have people sign on to a charter around doing inclusive co-design work? And you'll see at the top there's this commitment message that in my practice of community-based work, co-creation, I commit to continuous critical reflection on how to do this work better. And you'll see here there's a number of intersecting circles because they're interrelated concepts or ideas around what it means to do this work. And the link to the full charter is there in the Google Doc. And we are very open to input. It's been gone through a few iterations now, and we want to put it out into the world, but I'll highlight a few things. So the first is this notion of developing competencies. And there's lots of rich information there around what that means, but it's about courage. It's about curiosity, coming to this work with curiosity, coming to this work with creativity, with commitment to honoring different perspectives, understanding where you come from and listening to others. So there's a whole set of competencies and skills to do this work well. There's being inclusive. What does that mean? Being inclusive. It means being intentional at the outset. How do we think about addressing structural barriers? How do we think about building accessibility? It was one of the challenges we had. I think it was my job to think about closed captioning, which was an epic fail. So how do we think about accessibility? People have different accessibility needs. People experience different structural barriers, different languages. How do you think about the different elements of inclusivity, and how do you create safer spaces for people to come to? Honoring worldviews, which really means coming from a stance of cultural humility, and really being deep listening and understanding people have different worldviews and embracing those, and how that can enrich that conversation. And respect, learning, unlearning ways of doing things. This notion of establishing safe and brave processes. Lots of richness here around risk, around vulnerability, around building trust, to really have those comfortable and uncomfortable conversations, and creating a space where we can do that and honor those things. acknowledging historical harms, big one. We were doing this work at Six Nations and talking about years of colonialization, racism, discrimination. Lots of tears were shed, and recognizing people's pain. People come to this work with pain and not wanting to re-traumatize people, starting from a place of saying that there is pain. This work is not easy. Sometimes we'll make mistakes. How do we move beyond that? How do we build reconciliation? How do we start to work together? Valuing lived experiences. In many ways, that was a key element throughout our process about how do we honor people, that everyone brings lived experience. How do we bring those voices to the fore and really listen and value? What does it mean to value that and honor those lived experiences? And working together, we talked about being with. What does it mean to be with, to be in circles and sharing things together? And what does it mean to work together? And again, this idea is this vision and articulating some of the pieces of that vision. What does that look like? So I'm going to pause for a moment. And that was a really quick overview of lots of really rich conversation. And if people want to add, I know Jillian, you're here as well. If anybody wants to add to this notion of this charter.
Sure, Sandra, I think you've done a really nice overview. I'll just jump in for a minute to say, yes, this was a 4 a.m. brainchild that was really, when you have an immersive experience for 2-3 days together, there's so many themes that are being discussed. And my brain was, I guess, struggling in the sleep to process it all and really think about how do we actually make change happen from this incredible experience and all the voices that we've heard. And so I just tried to capture the themes that we kept hearing over and over again in different forms and think about how can we work together in the future to not lose this. And by creating a charter of how we would work together to make sure we remain authentic to the principles and goals that we were hearing. And so our hope is that this can help guide people's work and people can sign on to this charter. So we don't end up, we have an article, Are You Really Doing Co-Design? That's already out there in the world. Many of you may have seen it, recognizing that often it's not authentic. And how do we start to create a vision of how do we authentically do this work going forward, and hoping to create a call to action for people to try to follow these principles. So really happy to hear feedback and a work in progress, and it's co-created. So please include your voices.
I'm intentionally pausing here. For some of you, you may have seen this. For some of you, it may be new. Again, if people have thoughts or reactions to this idea, to some of the ideas embedded within this.
I can add that I love the idea of a charter, and it is meaningful to me personally. When I put my name on something, I feel an extra layer of commitment to honoring what I've, set out to achieve or am in agreement with. That one of the questions raised, and maybe I'll just raise it again here to the larger audience, is this a charter for researchers, or can this charter be also open and applicable to our service users or experience experts, people who bring lived experience? Can we have a singular charter that meets the needs of many? Nicolene, you're nodding. Was this your comment raised?
Yes, it is my comment, because I think if you are doing co-production or co-design, don't mess it up that we have 2 different charters. I think then we are messing it up, that this is for me and this is for somebody else. So then we get you and them, and I would like to have it as we as the whole. So I think it will be messy if you do 2 different. So that's my point of view. I would like to keep it together, but maybe persons with experience can say what they think.
Yeah, I think that is a well taken point, Nicolene, and that's our intention. We're just figuring out how do we write this in a way so it's meaningful to everyone. And then I think the original vision for the version we sent out was to be a call to arms for researchers, call to action for researchers, but we can have one charter and write a paper that highlights what this means for researchers and still have that call to action, but a single charter is where we're going to aim for.
I think sometimes when it comes to connection, we don't really consider what it means to, we talk about setting the table or the proverbial table. We don't really talk about the environment and what it fosters. And I really think that this, from both ends, both stakeholder as well as researcher, provides warmth, provides awareness as well too. Sometimes people with lived experience don't necessarily know what they're walking into. They are just excited to see systemic change or the potential of it, and that's it. And they find themselves shocked by certain interactions and things like that, where this provides kind of an honesty framework to say that you can perhaps provide gentle feedback on one component of this or something to that effect. I feel like there are times that with people that I do work with who are in these partnership contexts as well, aren't even necessarily aware that something was a certain type of harm or something like that. They don't have a name for it. So to give them a framework of understanding what this relationship works like or can work like, or what the intentions are of the people that they are choosing to partner with, I think that's kind of a beautiful thing to me personally.
If I can jump in just before Michelle, I just want to comment, Ray. I think that's so helpful. And one of the things I struggle with, having been through this incredible experience along with many of you, is how can words on paper capture the interrelational and emotional and dimension to what we've gone through? It all ends up looking flat. And words, there's such a lived component to all of this. It is so experiential. And I think you're tapping on that as well when you think about what you're saying here. So it's a challenge I throw out there to the group, because I really think, how can we possibly, share this in a way that comes even close to the impact it had on everyone who participated, which I've seen in email and feedback and comments, and evaluation stuff's great, but how can I tell that's any different than any other event, and how do we bring forth that difference? And sorry, Michelle, I'll let you jump in there.
Michelle Vaughn, you're welcome to come. Every Michelle is great.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the last two comments. Really, what about considering, I personally, when you were presenting about this, I would have loved to see the tiers, to see the beading workshop, to see the dancing alongside, with these models, because that's really going to capture, like, I'm just trying to envision, okay, in my mind, what does that look like? But I think if, you had the right permissions to actually show the event and to show those emotions coming forth, it would convey a lot more than just words on the page.
In those prototypes we created, there was a number of prototypes that had tiers at different places. I think the flower had tiers. I didn't show the one that Jillian's group did. Also had tiers of the gardener nurturing this work. So it's a great point. Thank you for that. Other comments?
I just realized I'm raising my actual hand. I'm like, oh yes, I have a comment. I was thinking, I'd been listening to some podcasts and was really trying to wrap my head around the recruitment challenge and understanding that when we're talking about people whose voices have not just been missing, but have been shut out deliberately from the dominant power forces of our systems, and that the being inclusive point, and this even connects to one of the models, the one with the house, where you need to knock and wait to be invited, and I'm wondering how we kind of bridge those, because I don't think we we're there yet with, being inclusive means that, this is the approach when someone is in the lead or an organizer, and has the capacity, or that it's within their scope of their role to be active around that. And it makes me feel like they're stationary, and being inclusive is inviting people in, which is quite different from the model with the house, where we're going into communities. And I know that at least one of the other models was really focusing on being in the community, going to where the people are. And so that kind of reverses the direction of the inclusion, and what do we need to do to be includable? And wondering, what does that mean, and how do we get to that and represent that? And does that make sense? I also love how so much of co-design is asking questions that don't have answers. They're just more questions are the answers, and that's part of the exploration.
Love this discussion. Those of you that are new to our co-design family, you're welcome to join us. This is the kind of discussion we have around how do we do this work better. One of the things that we did in the event is we actually had illustrators illustrate each day of the event, and also our other events as well, although I don't think we did it this time. And so this was one of the images, Sewing and Growing in Equity-Based Co-Production. And this is in relation to some of the work that Jillian and her team and some of the people on this call around the world around how do we build this work, grow it over time. And so this, here's the tiers, meeting people where they are, reconciliation. So there's those tiers that we were talking about. And so, some of the things that emerged from this, I'm not sure if it's a specific research agenda, but these were some of the themes that emerged around this idea of co-creation initiated by the community. I think, Louise, you just touched on that. Being includable, being allies, safety, solidarity. How do we build capacity? We had some challenges around, are there natural leaders in the community? Malik, who isn't here, I don't think today, but talked about going to the, if you want the Black community, go to the churches where lots of people are, or, going to where people are. And how do we address power, manage risk? Diverse voices. How do you ensure wide representation of diverse voices, yet ensure everyone's voice is heard? And sometimes that's a balance, right? You can have diversity, but ensuring that individuals are heard. How do we move to large-scale change? How do we move from individual projects to large-scale? How do we build social movement theory and practice? So those are some of the enduring questions or challenges that I think can fuel us going forward. And we're starting to think about where do we go going forward, and how do you want to be involved in the next steps going forward. And I'll just pause here for a moment to see if anybody else wants to add in on this.
Well, you see, Sandra, I like that you see it as the tiers. I see it as watering, and as not only as tiers, I also see it as growing things. So not as tiers, but as well, I don't know the English word, that things will grow. So yeah, so not only tiers.
Maybe I can comment there, Nicolene. It's actually both. It's the tiers that will nurture. That a clear message we heard is that if you don't do the upfront work to acknowledge historical harms and put forth restoration, allow people to grieve, to feel what they feel around past harms, you can't move to a place of good mind where we're all starting from the right place. And that was an experience we all had at the event. Once you're in that place, people can work together, and that becomes the nurturing water. So it's actually both that can then help to foster is not the right word, but to nurture and grow from there and to move forward. So it's really both that metaphor.
Yeah.
I wonder, Alexa, can you pop in the chat the Google form about how people would like to be involved going forward? I just want to do this before people leave. laughing when I look at this picture, the start when you're not ready. I think that was you, Nicolene. I loved that comment about sometimes, if we wait to be ready, will anything get done? So this idea, sometimes you're not ready and you're going to learn things along the way. You're going to grow along the way and being open to that. So lots of good messages, I think, here about how to move forward. Thank you, Alexa has popped in the chat. Oh, yes. Daniel, do you want to speak to that? Not all tears come from sadness.
Hello. No, I feel like I've taken that from somebody else now, because Louise did say that before I did. But yeah, through that discussion, I was thinking of how emotion is so important within co-design and often gets overlooked. So it's just so wonderful to hear the discussion about this, and that the tears can be relief, happiness, joy. And what came to mind was just a moment I had with my son today. I'll be digressing. So it's just wonderful to hear this discussion and the energy in the room.
Daniel, one of the things I didn't say yet is we talked a lot about stories. And one of the images that I think it was in the group I was in around stories and how they transform the way we think. So I know you were going to go to a story, so don't ever cut off your stories. That's also part of the richness of our learning and how we're transformed by people's stories and how they evoke things in different ways. We also had Luluama, I don't know if she's still here, but she was our poet in residence and created poetry. We had interpretive dance and visuals, and that helped to tap in, I think, to different parts of ourselves that did bring up emotion, I think, as well, or captured that in different ways.
Sandra, if I may, and Daniel, great to have you on the line. I think the emotions throughout are so important, and they underscore that relational nature of everything that we're doing and bringing our common humanity. And so we purposefully, in part, taking off from something Nicolene talked about in, I think, the July session, moving into the learning zone. We did a lot of activities that brought people to that place of, gee, I don't know how to do this. I'm vulnerable. I'm learning how to canoe or kayak, and I can put my professional hat away. Nobody's looking at that as we're all learning together, whether it's speeding or going out on the water. And a lot of emotion came out through that, but it was also this place of, we're all here to learn together, and we all have different experiences and background that we're bringing, but it's contributing together on an even playing field. That's so important.
Thanks, Jillian. There's my slide about how would you like to be involved. So again, just a kind of a little bit of our hub was thinking about, how do we grow our hub over time with like-minded people, and think about how do we better engage people, how do we build capacity, how do we innovate, and how do we evaluate. So again, this is a little bit of kind of where we want to go from here. We'd love to know how you'd like to be involved. I think in that Google form there's some things about where you come from and what you're most interested in, because we're starting to think about, okay, what's next? What do we need to do next? How do we build networks and continue to build those networks around the world? So really exciting. I am going to now turn it over to Nicolene and her team, who agreed to talk about CoPro 2023.
Yes, I hope, Christina, are you still there? Yes.
I'm still here, yes.
Okay, so maybe Christina, you should start.
Yes, I couldn't come to Canada, or I wouldn't like to go there. It was far away for me. But now I'm so glad, and I would welcome many of you to come to Jönköping and to CoPro 2023, which will take place the 6th till 8th of September here.
Yes. So you can already put that in your calendar, and you can already go to your boss or whatever to take to set it in your calendar that you are going to Sweden. Okay, let's take the next one. And what you have been listening today, it was wonderful in Canada, so it makes us a bit nervous. How can we do it in Sweden? But we learned a lot. We learned a lot from the format, and we will continue in that way. We will still have a small learning community, and I think about 50 persons together. So we don't make it bigger than that. Maybe a little bit, but maybe it's there. We have been talking about how are we going to do this, and most of them say the dialogue was so important, the interaction was so important. So we will keep that format. Constructive conversation will be 80%, but some people want to present. I know Gillian wants to present how is it going with the sowing growing model. So there is space for presentations, but we will have a lot of dialogues, and we will embrace the social activities and the artistic content. So that is the lessons from Canada that we really will do. And how are we doing that? Well, this is a new format, and we are learning. We are not ready, but we are starting. So we are having a planning group with an open door. And that means that you can always come, even if you think I can only come once. You are welcome to our planning group. We expect that you are prepared when you come. So we have our Google Docs so that you read maybe the things that we have done before. So we have the transparency by Google Docs, and we have the transparency by Padlet. I will show you that later. I know that people say, well, it's not possible to have a planning group with an open door. We think it is, but we have a small core team, you can say core team, or I call it the dream team. We have the dream team who will be there every time. And that is Luama, that's Rani. Rani is not here yet, but she was here for a little while. It's Julie Sweet from England. It is Christina. And it's Sandra from Canada, and it's me. So we will see that we have this continuity, and we will say you're always welcome. So you don't need to knock on the door. You are welcome, because we want to feel that you can influence this process. So we can take the next one. So we have a Padlet today, and there you can put on all your ideas that I think this is a good idea when we meet again, and just put it on. It's open for the whole of November, and then we will sit down and make a draft of the program, because our idea is if we have the program quite early in the draft, it is possible to find funding for you to find possibilities to come. Because I think in Sweden, we don't have the money yet, but we will fix that in a way. In Sweden, we will fix that we can have the accommodation and we can have the food, but we can't fix the travel costs. So in a way, everybody has to think about how can I fix my travel costs. So that's why we will have the program in a draft in January. So then you can find out where can I get my own funding. So that is the idea. The Padlet is open. Let's just put it there. And the Google Docs was in this PowerPoint, but you will get that also on the web. So any questions or any, I want to be in the planning group. So it's open.
Just dive.
Yes, just dive. Even if you don't really know what you are going to do.
And sometimes something just pop up and we don't know from where.
Yes. Crystal, that's great. That's great. Just send me an email. I had the email in the PowerPoint before. So that's just great. If you want to join in, you're so welcome. The next year, because we have also been thinking about the continuity, we will take it in Sweden, and we already know that Malik has promised he's going to take it to London. And we already have a next idea for 2025. And that will be very challenging. 2025, Luama has a vision, and her vision is that we will be in the developing countries. And I think we have to help. We have to help to make this vision true. So maybe that we already have to start when we are in Sweden, thinking about how can we help Luama to make this right. So that's our vision. We are dreaming, and we are the dreaming team. And I hope that you will feel that this is a nice dream and not a nightmare. Yeah. Any questions? Any other things?
So excited to have you lead this, Nicolene. Really exciting.
Yes, it is. And I'm not ready, but I'm just starting. Yes.
And there might be some tears along the way.
Yeah, probably.
And you know, Nicolene is a very, very brave person.
So are you, Christina?
No.
Hi, Nicolene, it's Alexis. If I could just maybe share some reflections from our last event,
Yes.
which were just briefly touched on, and something I would be happy to support for the next event is in terms of thinking about accessibility and accommodations, like reasonable accommodations or so on for this next event now. There's some ways we can do it that are very low cost, some might be higher cost, but there are very low cost ways to also start thinking about it. So I think we learned a lot and captured a lot of that, and I'm happy to support that going forward, but just to also for you all to think about, because I'm sure there's lots of expertise there to start planning for now and thinking about how to plan for it.
Yes. Thank you. We will look at that. Yes. It was great.
And then the last, but definitely not least thing is we've been doing some thinkings somewhere online. We always talk about online and in person. There's love to be in person, but we are going to continue some of our work around, we had a speaker series through the Co-Design Hub, and we've taken feedback about whether we want a speaker series or transform that into equity-based co-production discussions. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's going to talk a little bit about what is to come.
Thanks, Sandra. So this is really exciting that we're sort of moving into a new sort of series of discussion based. So we really want to focus on how can we learn together and learn with each other. And so instead of us just presenting and hearing about other people's projects, learning from those and seeing how that we can advance this work. And so we're so excited to share with you our first session in this new series on creativity in co-production. And so we have, I know our group, Alexis talked about the developmental evaluation, and we have published an article in a special issue that was led by Joe Langley from the UK. And there is a whole series in the special issue around creativity and co-production. And so we wanted to pick that up and bring this into practice. And we also had Tara French at our in-person session in August, and we wanted to have a discussion on how can we integrate creativity into co-production. We've heard how co-design is flexible and there's a need for different types of methodologies, and so how can we integrate that into our practice? So that event is going to be November 18th, this coming November. It's going to be 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So if you're joining from other places, I'm sorry I don't know the time change, but we hope that you can join us. There is a registration link that someone hopefully can pop into the chat. And we want, perfect, thank you. And we want to make this, ensure that this is an inclusive and accessible event. And so we're learning from our past events, and we want to know how that we can help to include other people at this event who might not have had the opportunity to join before. So if you would like to let us know, you can email us at codesign@maxter.ca, And so we can support you to participate in this event. And with that, I wonder if we should move on to we have some questions around evaluating this session. We talked about
Sam, do you want to put a little plug in for December as well?
Go for it.
Michelle, do you want to talk about December?
Yes, well, Nicolene, begin before you're ready. So this is still in the works, but what we're planning to do in responsiveness to discussion and follow-up feedback that we've had from people who are here today and have attended other speaker series is to really dig deep and explore the language that's used around experience experts, structurally vulnerable populations, marginalized families. Well, my context is families, but marginalized populations, and to not really present the answers necessarily, but have more dynamic feedback and conversation around what terms are people using, how are they using them, how did they come to be using them, what's problematic about these terms. So please stay tuned, and you can access our Twitter or our newsletter if you'd like the details and dates. We're just planning those for December, as Sandra said.
And we're open to new ideas. So if there's a topic that you're passionate about and you'd like to present, we'd love to hear that, or you know someone that would be good, please pass those along. Again, there's lots of really interesting topics that we can dive into in a sort of online format.
What was the date in December?
We have a proposed date. Is it the World Day of Disability? I think there's
the day before. I think it's the Friday, December 4th, I believe it's from memory, so please don't.
December 2nd is our proposed date, but I do need to confirm that with the people that we're hoping will be a part of our panel.
That sounds good. Sounds good, Michelle.
So yes, if you have other ideas, we're always open to them. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I think this is all to say that there's lots of exciting stuff. So even though we're sort of closing the loop on the CoPro events today, we have some new things upcoming. We would love to hear from you around what you'd like to see. And in doing that, we have a evaluation. We're trying to shake up our evaluation today. So we are going to try a Slido. So if you've not used Slido before, we're going to do what's called a word cloud, and you can go to slido.com. And then at the top, it says join as a participant. And then you just enter this code. It's on the screen and in the chat, or you could use your phone to capture the QR code. And we want to hear from you about one thing that you learned today, and they should pop up as we're going through on the Slido as a word cloud.
The text box is too small. There you go.
You might have to shorten it. I think it only allows like 25 because we want to get sort of things popping up on the screen in a word cloud. So sorry, Sandra, you might have to just be succinct.
It's good. Thank you.
Oh, these are great so far. Oh, flexibility. That's a big one. That's really cool to see come up. Flexibility, creativity, emotions. I think that's a big one where feelings are okay. Tears can be good. Begin before you're ready. context matters, patience, possibility, that one's coming up. So the bigger the word, the more people are talking about that one or writing that word in. Program theory equals hypotheses, need time, value, curiosity, show empathy, responsiveness. I love this one around CoPro family. There's no one right way. Patience, begin before you're ready. Acknowledging our tears. Responsiveness, need community. Evaluation is awesome. I love that. Thanks for joining us. All right, we have one more participant typing, and then we'll move on. I'll take a screen capture of these and post it on our Twitter. But thanks so much for putting your responses and evaluations in today. So we have two more polls coming up, so I'll just go to the next one. You can stay on the same space. I'm hoping that it'll work, that responding to this prompt around, I wish this event had. So thinking about what can we do to make this practice better in the future? What can we do and implement in our November session so that we make this space geared towards your learning needs? Be in person to see you all again. Yes, that would be amazing. Can't wait for our sweet event. Put on captions earlier. Thank you. Yes, that's important. And I think that's something that I often forget to do too. So thank you for that reminder. Unheard voices leading. Having food. Yes, I would love to have food here. Conversations, small conversations, more interaction. If you want to let us know what kinds of interactions you'd like to see, like, would you like to see breakout rooms or more pieces like this Slido or Kahoot, what that might look like for you? Breakout rooms, longer discussion periods. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing these up. Social media platform group. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. We do have a Twitter, and I've been live tweeting a little bit. So if you've seen me kind of like have my camera off, I'm trying to multitask. But yeah, I think it's a really great way to bring in the larger community of people who can't be here today. One instruction at a time. Okay. I think these are really great learning lessons, opportunities for dialogue in between events, representation from communities in realist evaluation. I think these are really good points. I am going to just keep us moving forward onto our last slide. And this one is just around how the event has inspired you today. And if you'd be interested in sharing your inspirations from this event for the future, we would love to hear from you. So this event has inspired people to stay connected, and I love that. I think that's so fantastic, and we've shared a couple different ways that we can stay connected, contacting us through our website, on social media, signing up for the newsletter. But I think more than that, it's also completing the work that we're doing. So I saw on there finishing the charter. Jillian, is that you? And our group, networking more, staying connected, keep going together, going to Sweden. Yes, that's all. I love that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, but thank you all so much for these contributions, and sort of seeing evaluation of our session in a different way. That's not just completing a form online. So I'll hand it back to you, Sandra.
Wow, it's 11:23. We've been online together for a long time, although it's flown by in many ways. I'm going to wrap us up, but are there any last comments or questions before we close it down today? This was a bit unusual, the longer time frame, but it was our final one and we wanted to wrap up, so didn't want it to feel rushed. So yeah, any last comments? Thanks, Maritza. Glad you had fun. I know there's some new names and faces I don't recognize. So again, for those new people that came, thank you so much. It's lovely to have you. And for the people I know, it's also lovely to see you. So thank you for joining us.
I think it was really great, Sandra, and it is also giving the energy to Sweden to get the charter when it's ready and immediately look at it. What are we going to do with it in Sweden and so on? So that we are not doing something new, but we are really taking forward what we already have done. So we will build on it. So thank you so much. It was really great.
And some of our prototyping, we talked about keeping up the energy, right? Yeah. So that's so important. Go ahead, Jillian.
I was just going to say the same thing, and I think a lot of those themes around keeping up the energy actually came from Nicolene at the event, but we really need it. This takes a lot of energy to do, and the team's done an amazing job today. And I think I started the keep going together, and I think that's something we all need to do because it's a lot of work, and we need to draw energy from each other and celebrate along the way. So super happy about the new series you're doing, Sandra and team, Michelle.
Love it.
Gillian and Michelle, is it okay if we do some announcement about the pod that we had with you? Because I interviewed Gillian and I interviewed Michelle about power sharing. So if you want to listen to that podcast, it's on Coach Talk. Maybe we can put it in the notes. It's about 20 minutes, a 20 minutes podcast.
Great
point.
point.
Do you have the link to put up, Nicolene?
Not now, and I have to rush home because it's already dark here. I have to go, but I can put it. We can probably put it somewhere. Maybe we can
put it on the Hub website.
We're going to put it on the website. I was just going to say that. So this recording, I don't know, it's long, but I think we can post it on the website. So we will post it. Emma, I'm looking at you.
It's just a link.
And the link we will put on the website. Yes, yeah. Excellent, great idea. Oh, there it is.
And I would just say the podcast was so fun to do with you, Michelle Farr and Nicolene, and an easy way for knowledge transfer. It's 20 minutes or so long, and I think we touched on a lot of themes. So it's something we should also consider going forward as an easy way to make things happen quickly.
Yeah, Louise put it already in the chat, and there are all the episodes there. And you were the 50th, so we had a celebration that this was number 50 of the podcast. So we celebrated. But there are a few about co-production. You can find them.
There's lots we can learn from the Esther Network about celebrating.
Yes.
And bringing fun into this work that I think we need to maybe do a session on going forward. How do you make it fun? I love Esther Cake Days, and I love the Esther Song, and way outside my usual box, but a lot of fun.
Yes.
Well, I think the creativity one, I think it will be fun as well, right? We're going to make that interactive. So anyway, lovely to see all of you. I'm going to have us sign off now. It's great to see you. Hopefully we'll see some of you next month for the next dialogue. Take care, everybody.